Hey everybody, it's Kate. So, today we're going to start part 3 of my Tilda doll start to finish series. I will link the other videos below if you haven't seen those yet. So far we've got a supplies video and then a sort of cut and fabric prep video. But before we get started, I just want to say a couple of things. In case you were wondering, I got this gorgeous Tilda fabric from Tracy at Art Attack Supplies. I believe she carries the largest selection of Tilda in the United States. So I would definitely check out her shop. She's got fat quarters of Tilda fabric pretty much available all the time. And then you can also order full yards from her as well. She's got super fast shipping, great customer service, and there was also recently a new Tilda release. I think one of the collections is called Sweetheart, and now I can't remember if the second one is called Autumn Tree or something like that, but it's gorgeous. And so yeah, definitely check that out. I'll leave a link in the description box. And then also the Art Attack and Tilda Friends Facebook group is having a challenge right now for Tilda dolls. So it's a challenge, not a swap. So if you're a beginner, I think it would be just a super way to get started making Tilda dolls if you'd like to. So the challenge runs until October the 15th, and you just make your Tilda doll and post your pictures. Yeah, so I think it's a great sort of opportunity. You know, sometimes we need a little motivation to get started, and I think a challenge is a great way to do that. So yeah, I'll leave a link to the Facebook group below, and I really hope you join in because, you know, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So, okay, let's get started. So we have already cut our fabric strips 6 inches wide by whatever, you know, height we need to fit our pattern pieces. So I've pressed them and am getting ready now to trace and sew my pattern pieces. So what you want to do to make sure that you have good crisp joins between your fabric pieces, obviously you're going to meet right sides together, and then you're going to pin in a particular way because we want our seams. I just stuck that pin in my mouth. Sorry, y'all. I guess it's just a habit. Can't really talk around a pin. Because we want our seams to meet perfectly when we turn our doll out, we are going to pin them as close to perfect as we can get them. So let me refocus my camera here a little bit. So you see that? We want those seams on the edges of the body parts of the doll to be as close to perfect as we can get them. This is going to be the bodice seam of the doll, and so we do not want to sew these crooked because you don't want the edges of the doll to look like that. You want these to be just exactly right. So what I do is meet these two edges on each side. You can kind of see here, there's the skin fabric and then here's the bodice fabric. So I'm going to get those just as close to perfect as I can get them. I'm going to grab my pin and then I'm just going to pin right through that seam before I do my tracing. And I'm going to pin perpendicular to the fabric. We don't want to pin, you know, we don't want to pin this way because we don't want the fabric to slide up and down. So does that make sense? So pin that right in place there. And then what I do for tracing is I pin my pattern right to my fabric and then trace around. And I kind of you know, hold it down while I'm tracing just to make sure I'm getting the best impression I can. And then also, anytime you see the dotted lines, you don't sew there. So, as a visual reminder, whichever works better for you. You can either just leave this space blank to let yourself to know not to sew across it, or you could even draw those dashed lines there. All you're doing is just making sure you've got a visual reminder when you're at your sewing machine where not to sew, if that makes sense. Ooh, I just knocked the camera. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so what I've done is pin all my little pieces together, and I've started tracing here. Yeah, we're just about ready to move to the sewing machine, and that'll be our next thing. We'll go ahead and take everything to the sewing machine and sew around our trace lines. So I'm going to get all of my stuff traced, and I'll meet you back at the sewing machine in just a minute. Okie dokie, I'm back at my sewing machine. I have all of my pattern pieces. I've got them traced on my fabric. Apparently I'm having trouble talking. So I've got everything traced out, and now I'm in front of my sewing machine ready to sew. So the only thing I would say about this part of it is that I put my stitch length on about a 2, which is a pretty short stitch length. That's going to help you when you turn your curves. You don't want to have big stitches, because then it's going to take a big bite of the fabric, and it's not going to allow you to sort of, it's not going to allow you really good control over the turn of your stitches, because dolls are curvy, so we need to be able to turn curves nicely, to sew nice curves, so that when you turn your doll out, her little feet and her little hands and her little head are nice and crisp looking, and not sort of square looking. Yeah, so I'm going to start here at the top of the leg, and I'm just going to sew all the way down and around to the bottom, and then back up to the top, and then I'm going to do the same thing for this leg. I don't know, yeah, you can see the blue marks better on the skin part of the fabric than you can here. That's barely picking that up on camera. So yeah, that's what I would say. Wherever you've got an opening, you want to start on one side of the opening and then sew around, so that you're not picking your, you're not having to take your item back out of the sewing machine. Like for instance, with this doll, I'm going to start down here at the bottom, because this part's going to be open. So I'm going to sew all the way down, around, and then take my piece out of the machine. If you started somewhere random, or started here up at the top, you'd have to sew down to this part, stop, put it back in the machine, and then sew again. So that's just a way to sew a little more efficiently. So I'm going to do this leg right quick. When I get down to the turning part, I'm going to show you how I turn these little small areas here while still sewing. I'm sorry, my dryer is going off in the background. Wah. So yeah, I'm going to fast forward a little bit now and do a little sewing here. Okay, so here I am coming up to my pin. What I'm going to do is sew right up to the pin. I'm going to sew into this little seam here, so that I'm sure that the fabric is stable before I remove the pin, because I don't want the fabric to shift and put our little seams off here. So I'm going to sew right up to the edge. Okay, now I'm going to take my pin out. I know that the presser foot is trapped that fabric there, so it's not going to shift on me. And then I'm just going to keep sewing. So we'll fast forward a little bit again. Okay, so I'm getting ready now to start turning my foot. You will see me lift the presser foot quite frequently, and I may even just go one stitch at a time. It's important to get to know the speed of your sewing machine, and it may in fact be adjustable on the foot of your machine. Mine has a little lever, I want to say, that tells the machine how fast you want it to sew based on the pressure of your foot. And so it's got some different settings there. I want to say I've got mine set about medium, but if you're new, it might be helpful to set it a little slower until you learn to be sensitive to your foot pedal. Okay. So I'm just lifting the presser foot to make sure I've got a really good bead on where my mark is. See, and then I'm going to go just sort of one stitch at a time. Because since I don't have a mark here now extending out past my presser foot, it's important to lift it up so I can have a little look-see at what's going on here. So I just lift the foot and move the fabric whatever way I think works best. Okay, so we are almost back straight now. So I hope that makes sense. You know, take your time. It doesn't need to be a speedy process. So short stitch lengths, slow your roll when you're sewing, and you should end up with some really nice curves, and like the hands and feet of your doll should be nice, and your head of your doll should be nice and smooth looking. So I'm going to sew around all the pieces of my doll, and I'll be right back to start turning the doll out. So we are really making some progress here. Okay, so I've got all my body pieces traced out and sewn here. And one thing I didn't mention before when I was at the sewing machine is that anytime you're going to leave a portion of that you're not going to sew across an area, these are going to be open stress points here. It's important to take 3 or 4 stitches, hit your reverse button, take 3 or 4 stitches back, and then stitch, and then, you know, just keep on stitching around the rest of your little arm or leg or whatever it is. It's important to reinforce these stitches so that they don't unravel when you get ready to turn the doll out and stuff it. So I did that on all these open places. So here's the arms, and there's the little hole for you to stuff the arms. So I've got 4 arms here for my 2 dolls. I've got my 2 little doll bodies here. And I've got 4 legs going. So obviously this will be another place that you reinforce here. So just 3 or 4 stitches, reverse it 3 or 4, and then go right along sewing. It's important to do that so that when you get ready to turn the doll out, those little edges don't begin to unravel here. So what I'm going to do now is start cutting out all the little body pieces. Excuse me. And what I'm going to do is just leave about a little 1/4 of an inch seam allowance here, what you might call, a quilter would call it a scant 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to cut around my doll, and then here, now here's my cat, and he's going to come in here and holler now. Fatty! I'm trying to film, Fatty. Say hi to the folks. Oh, now he's going to rub his head on my on my little stand that I've got my camera, aka my iPhone, set up on here. So I'm not going to have you sit through me cutting all these, but what I did want to show you that's super important is that anytime you get to a curve, you want to come in and snip right up to your stitching, not through your stitching, but right up to it. And this will help when you get ready to turn your doll out. Excuse me, it'll make this curve nicer. So for instance, I'd come and do this as well. Just right up to the stitching, and you really want to take 2 or 3 little snips there. And you want some really good sharp scissors to do this. You want some scissors that'll cut right to the point. And then I'm also going to do the same thing for the top of her head. I'm just going to take some little snips, snip, 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 so that turns nicely as well. So I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to cut out all my body parts here, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I've got all my pieces cut out. And the first thing I did after I got my pieces cut out and my little cuts made so I can turn my corners is I used my iron on a good high setting with a good bit of steam, and I pressed these body parts flat, just like we talked about when we were putting our original strips together to cut these out of. This is going to, again, it's called setting your stitches, and it's going to make your finished product look a little more professional. And so then I started turning my doll pieces out so I could start filming and show you guys how I was turning the pieces out. And I ran up on an error. So I thought this would be a good time to stop and show you what I'm going to do to correct it. So on my cream colored doll here, if you can see, this join right here between her little bloomers and her leg, this looks pretty good. So does this one between her little leg and her boot. That matches up pretty close, so I'm satisfied with that. But when you turn the leg over, there's a little jog here. See how these two lines don't meet up? I don't care for that. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. If this doesn't bother you, just leave it. But it bothers me. And in fact, these two little areas, I mean, this is going to be under the dress the whole time, and then this is probably going to be covered up. But I'm perfectionist enough that I need to fix it. So I'm gonna. And here's what I'm doing. So all I did, here's my little doll leg here. See how I turned it back out from this position. And I used my handy dandy seam ripper here to just take this seam out. I took it down from the hip all the way down to the boot, just below the seam that got sideways. So then all I'm going to do is rematch up those seams and sew back across it again. You can kind of tell whether your little seams are going to line up if you look at these little joins here while the doll is still inside out. These two meet up almost perfectly, and if you open the little seam up here, you'll be able to see that there's no jog there. It's not off, and it looks good. So when I get ready to sew this back together, I'm just going to make sure these two line up perfectly. I'm going to pin it in place and then just redo that seam. That's what's great about sewing. If you got a seam in there you don't like, rip it out and go again. Your sewing machine won't mind, I'm sure. So once I get this little issue repaired, I'll be right back. Okay, I've got my little issue fixed now. I just ripped out this seam right here from about there, of course, to the end here. And then I just repositioned and sewed it back together. So if you can see, they match up a lot better now, so that when I turn this little doll leg out, we won't have that little jog there, because that just bothers me. If it doesn't bother you, leave it. Don't even worry about it. So what I wanted to do is show you the tools I use to turn my dolls out. And I'm going to go ahead and turn out this blue doll here so that you can see how it works. And this is going to be the easiest part of the doll to turn out, except for the head there, because you see how tight that little neck area is. The first thing I do is just kind of loosen up the fabric, especially towards the skinnier parts so that it'll turn out a little easier for you. And then I just put my hands in there and see how much of the doll I can get turned out using just my hands. Okay, so I'm starting to get a little hung up here, so I'm going to use my hemostats. This is the best tool I've ever used to help with turning out dolls and doll parts. It's just super duper helpful. Okay, so now I'm down to her neck here, and you can see how the fabric's sort of in a bind. I'm just going to use my fingers to loosen it up a little bit. And then I'm going to try to see if I can use my hemostats to pull a little of this fabric through. You see how it'll grab and pinch a little bit? And now that I've pulled on the top, I'll go back in underneath the bottom, and you kind of just alternate between the two. Because you want to coax it more than force it, because you really don't want to tear your pretty little doll that you've been, you know, building. Okay, so I'm pretty well like stuffed up right here. I'm going to try pull it apart a little bit with my fingers, and then reach down in there with my hemostats and see if I can get another little piece to come up. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. So then I'm going to alternate again. And there's her little head. Aww. Yay. So now I'm just going to take the points, I mean it's nice and round, the little ends of my hemostats, and I'm actually going to run that along the seams like that, so that those will be just as crisp as we can get them, all the way along the seams of the doll on both sides. Let me get this side. So there's her little shoulders there. So I'm going to run it along her little shoulders and down along her little sides here. And so once I've got that, I may also even kind of do the fabric like this just to pull those seam allowances as close to the edge as I can get them, because what I'm going to do now is iron my doll to set my stitches again. I'm going to iron the pieces flat like this, and see how her little head's, oops, sorry. See how her little head's kind of straight right there instead of round looking? I didn't get that seam pushed out all the way. You don't want to iron her with the side of her head being all square. There we go. Both sides there. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now, for each part of the doll, I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to iron her on both sides. And she's ready for stuffing. So cute! Yay! Okay, so I think that's good enough for today. This video is probably going to be a little long, a little overly long anyway, but I wanted to make sure I showed you that I had made an error and that it was simple and fast to correct. Yeah, so I want to say thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, be sure to let me know. I'd be happy to help in any way I can. And if you got a minute and if you enjoy this series, I would really appreciate it if you take a minute to subscribe to my channel. That would be totally awesome. So thanks for watching, everybody. Y'all have a great weekend. Bye.